will make an interesting picture.
Yeah,
I
I can't quite figure out what's going on here. I mean, I've got a series of
lighting.
Yeah, it's clearly the lighting. Either that, or I may need medical attention. But we'll figure it out. We'll get through the presentation. I think the host needs to give me the ability to.
Sorry. Yep, I am negligent in my.
No, I don't even know how that works. So
I need to make you the host. So then you're
steps ahead of me.
You're gonna be the host, so you've got it.
Okay, David Chamber.
No, Doug got it.
I gave it to Doug for some reason. Doug, sorry about that. You're gonna have to give it to Jeff. Sorry about that.
It's like playing hot potato.
I know.
Nobody else went to brush their hair, I see.
No. Well, I did. I don't know if you.
I'm not sure, Dana. You're dealing with a bunch of kind of middle-aged men here. There's not a lot to brush.
My brush complains every time I try.
So do the ladies normally join your call?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Doug, I think you still got host. I unfortunately gave the baton to you instead of to Jeff.
Okay. Tell me what I need to do.
So you need to go to participants at the bottom, and then
I'll do it.
hover over Jeff Engell.
Oh yeah.
And then you should have more. It should say more, and then you just there. There you go.
The host
Thank you.
now.
Well
Yes,
done.
sir. Okay. So we are going to share this screen. There we go.
Never give your power away with leaving a string hooked to it.
Well, I don't get to do it without doing that in Zoom. So if anybody else knows, you let me know.
All right, there you go. I think you guys should see a presentation at this point.
Yep.
Okay, good. So, I'm full disclosure. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert in, emotional behavior or anything like that. But I always try to, every year at the start of the year, do a little self-reflection for myself to think about, what is it that I'm working on and how have things kind of worked out for me in the year past, and what is it that I want to do going forward. And I know that the topic of the day tends to be COVID, and it's been a massively disruptive event for all of us. And I wanted to put a few thoughts around that, and then hopefully give a few tools that I'm using in my personal life for things that I'm thinking about that maybe can help all of us as we kind of move forward, and hopefully ultimately as we move out of this space that we've been in. So this presentation, 3 Ps, we're talking about burnout, specifically when it comes to work, but I think it also applies to our lives kind of in general. So,
hey, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Before you get going, especially for Dana's benefit, could you introduce yourself a little bit and kind of like who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've done a bunch of economic consultancy work the last kind of decade or so, spent most of my time overseas. My most recent assignment was in East Africa. I was working in Uganda, held an office in a space in Nairobi. And lived over there for a while working on ag type projects. They were always funded by international development organizations or by foreign governments. That tends to be the consulting that I do. So that's kind of the space that I come out of.
Very nice. I spent a month in Uganda 4 years ago. My sister was teaching over there, and then I did some studying in Kenya. So would love to connect on that level and
at
a later point. Mm-hmm.
It's the place that I, without getting too far off topic, but I mean, it's the place that I see incredible promise in wanting to be in. There are obviously challenges with doing work there, but that when we talk about the development space, I mean, that's where development is going to happen. It's not going to happen it's not going to happen in the Western world or the global North or whatever sort of moniker you want to apply to it. I always found, and I'll move on after this quick little story, but I always found that one of the biggest juxtapositions was when I would I'd leave Nairobi on what I called the Midnight Express, because it's literally a plane that leaves at 12:01 after midnight, because they get to subtract one day of a landing fee, having been in Nairobi for that day. So anyway, the Lufthansa flight leaves at 12:01. You wake up and you're in Europe, and then I went immediately to meet a friend in Luxembourg, and I thought, the incredible change between being in Nairobi to like 12 hours later sitting in Luxembourg at a cafe. It's hard to verbalize that. Anyway,
Yeah.
exciting
Well,
part of the world, and it is the future of development for sure.
thanks for sharing that. Thanks, Doug. That was good to know.
Yeah. So when we talk about burnout, there's an actual, medical definition for it. And you've had a chance to read it because it's been on the board, but a lot of what burnout is connected to work related stress. I actually think in COVID, we've now found ourselves looking at that, not just in work, we've looked at that in our own lives, and that it's actually, having impact on things beyond work. The picture that I chose was very intentional, because it's got a young woman here that, is trying to juggle multiple things. And we've seen that the impact of COVID has been disproportionate onto women. Our female partners,
Amen.
our wives, are our, the people we're engaged with. I mean, they're already dealing, most women, to generalize, are already dealing with an impossible task of running households and dealing with children. And it's already a disproportionate burden that's placed on them. And now COVID has further exemplified that. And one of the things that we're seeing that I think is a very negative trend for us as a society is that we're seeing a lot of women drop out of the workforce, and dropping out of the workforce permanently, into which we're losing this massive knowledge base and this great perspective that, I don't know how we reclaim that. I think that's a question for somebody that's much smarter than me to try to figure out how we're able to go about that. So that was the intention behind this picture. So when we talk about burnout, again, what is burnout? Well, we've got some survey data that most employees have experienced this. The statistics, they're more likely to take a sick day, more likely to visit the emergency room, and they're looking for new jobs. So this is not a problem that is just for the employee. This is something that should be recognized for the employer as well, because these types of things, sick days, visits to the ER, people looking for new jobs, those are all costs to an employer, and limits productivity. So the other thing about that is that I think it's important to recognize what the potential liability could be from this type of issue. If you've got, say that your accountant, that's, your chief financial officer, whoever, is not getting enough sleep at night, or is constantly burnt out because you're putting more and more responsibility onto them. Let's say they transpose a number here or there, or they miss a comma here and there. Like, what could that mean financially to the company? It could be a very big, net loss at some point. So I think it's important to recognize that as humans, we have this need for mental health and positive psychology. The other thing that I think is challenging for us, and I think all of us here or the majority at least are Americans, is that we reward this behavior. We reward the man or woman who is in the office all the time. Oh, Dana's here all the time. Oh, Todd pulls incredible amount of hours. We reward, which is a pretty negative feedback loop that actually feeds into this of us experiencing these concepts of burnout. So I think we need to do some reflection on us as a society, which I always think is a positive thing to do. So what's happened during COVID? Well, I think most of us have experienced this. We don't go to offices anymore. Now we have home offices. Dana, great example. You've got a banner over your right shoulder. This must be your new, place of business. It probably, you had a different place of business before this. So now offices are replaced with home offices. One of the things that's extremely disruptive to me has been my social circle. One of the things that I like to do and was go downtown. And I know if I could go downtown at about 11 o'clock on any day of the week, I could find the table of old boys that were having coffee, and I could sit there and bullshit with them for an hour or two. And I found that very refreshing. It was a fun activity for me. Those days are long gone. The idea of retooling our routines. Again, like as a single guy, I would go to restaurants, I would eat. I enjoyed going to the gym. Those are not places that I frequent anymore. So I'm spending more time at home. I've got a fun library, but how far does that actually take you? The social interaction is missing. And then I think the other thing that we've not really addressed, or at least I've not addressed in my own life, is the fear that we had of COVID from the beginning. So at first I thought, okay, this is kind of like this, it's like the flu. Oh, you get sick for a little bit. And then we didn't have complete information about it. So it led to this irrational fear of, we have to be afraid of everything. And people had different degrees of that, but it was a thing for me for a while, and I kept myself very isolated. And now I feel as though I've moved into kind of like a healthy, I don't know if fear is the right word, but a healthy level of respect for what it is. And I think there's people that are still dealing with this. They're dealing with this like fear and uncertainty on certain levels that have created anxiety for all of us, whether it was actually to the point of fear or whether it was just like a general anxiety. I think we've all felt that. So these factors factoring into our traditional lives, it's accelerated this burnout process. So all of that doom and gloom, let's move on to what we can do to actually, not experience this. So this is not something that I created. This is actually a conversation that people have talked about before, and they talk about these different 3 Ps to avoiding burnout: priorities, positive constraints, and psychology. So let's talk about each of these. Priority versus priorities. I think this is a good quote. When everything is important, nothing is. There's a million different ways to say this. One cannot service 2 kings. I mean, there's a million proverbs that share this same idea. But the idea being that things can be important, but they can't both be most important. You do have to do some sort of ranking. This slide actually comes from, there's a lot of background on how we use language, and Google tends to be a great repository of how language is used. So if you look at the frequency in which we started using the word priorities, plural, versus priority, it actually has accelerated after about 2004. There was a lot more usage of this. And if you think about the way that we ask these questions in society today, I'm guilty of this. I ask, well, okay, what are your priorities for the next year? We're putting this on a plurality that never used to exist. Prior to that, it was very singular. What is your priority for the day? What are you going to do today? What is your priority? Now we've conflated that with a plural version of that we use ubiquitously in how we use the language. So we've kind of conditioned ourselves to believe that there are all these different things out there that we're supposed to give equal credence to in equal levels of respect. And that's come out of the language itself kind of matching society's preference of, here we are, we're going to put these priorities, plural, in place. So we hear this sometimes from people. Oh, it's so hard for me to prioritize. Oh, I don't know what I'm supposed to do next. Well, to me, that's someone being able to that's someone that doesn't have the skill set to actually say like, okay, this is what's important. I need to do this, and I need to push all of this other stuff to the side. I'm guilty of this for sure. I have trouble prioritizing. I can hear myself saying those words. To reflect on it with the idea that I actually am having trouble making choices around what's important and what's not, that's something I need to work on. That is definitely something, reflecting on myself, that I need to work on. So that's what this is doing. So how do we do that? Well, we've got some tools, some questions that we can ask ourselves. And I think these have different importance to different people depending on their depending on their work. This idea of, is a task still important? Maybe. Long-term projects, we've all worked on them. They change, they evolve as you go through them. Maybe it's not as mission critical for you to do what it was that you were supposed to do at day 0 as it is day 100. Am I really the only person who can do this? This is a great question for people who are in management to be able to delegate. Should I be handing this off to a more junior employee or someone else who can do this? Is this the most important thing right now? I'm guilty of this. I use this as, I call this blocking. So I'll have an important task that I need to do, but there's other tasks that are more attainable and more, I would say, gratifying and maybe more fun to do. So I do those first because I like the gratification that comes from it. Is it really what I'm supposed to be doing? No, probably not. I'm blocking this other activity that I should be doing. And then number 4, and I want to be careful with this one. If this was the only thing I completed today, would I be satisfied in my day? Okay, so what I don't want is for this to be something that we micro apply to everything that we do in our lives. So for example, happy hour, having a beer, being part of the global chamber, doing that thing. The answer to this question, number 4, is no. This is probably not the most important thing you did today, but it still has some sort of enjoyment. There's some sort of fulfillment about it. So I think we should be careful with number 4. But I think when you set out to look at your day, if you only were able to complete one thing, what would it be that was relative and was important? So anyway, so there are some questions and some tools that you can use to kind of mirror your understanding of what your priority, singular, not plural, is for the day. There's kind of a litmus test for how to do that. Okay, number 2, positive constraints. Work expands so as to fill the time allotted for it. I found this in my first job. I always found it amazing that we got all of the work done that we needed to do in exactly no more, no less than 8 hours. How was it that was the exact time frame that we needed to do exactly what that task was? Exactly 8 hours. Button to button, no extra minutes, 8 hours is what it took. I think we're finding that the idea of work is starting to change. To go back to my story, my first job out of college, I worked in banking. I was working 8 to 10 hours a day. I felt as though that's what I needed to be in the office, even though I would, be bored for most of that. I was looking at role models at that point in time, other like senior people that were in the firm. And I said, okay, this guy is here for 10 hours a day. I never really dug into why he was there for 10 hours a day until much later, after I actually left the profession. The reason he was there for 10 hours a day is that he had a terrible home life. He was in the midst of, divorcing his wife. He had children that had somewhat kind of abandoned him. He felt completely isolated. And so he was spending as much time as possible at work. That was a terrible role model for me to try to like embrace and emulate as somebody coming right out of college. There was no There was no healthy reason for him to be there. And so that was something I felt I needed to reflect on a long time after that. And in this Parkinson's law, this idea leads to bureaucracy. I mean, it's why government processes are how they are. I mean, it takes forever to do stuff. So a little bit of comedy to this. Parkinson, work expands. Hortzman's, work contracts to fit the time we give it. If you give somebody a 3-hour deadline to deliver something to your desk, guess what? The project takes 3 hours. And then this one at the bottom that I really like, if you wait until the last minute, it only takes a minute to do. Most of my life and some of my more brilliant moments, I will say, have come under the gun where you've got about a minute to deliver something. And well, lo and behold, you're able to execute in that amount of time. So let's be careful with how much time we actually put towards work or towards a certain activity. Some examples of positive constraints. New Zealand, 4-day work week. A company boosted productivity, creativity, job satisfaction. Nothing new. There's plenty of examples of this. 2019, Microsoft, Japan, an incredibly industrious society that values time in an office almost as a religious construct of that person needs to be in that office. 39% increase year over year on employees. That's phenomenal. Sweden, 23 months, 6-hour workday for nurses, productivity levels go up, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, this is nice. Now let's take this example 3 and put it into a little more context. So what could you do if you were working a hospital 6 hours a day? My sister's a nurse. She works 12s. There are 2 shifts. If you worked 6s, there'd be 4 shifts. Let's say you got a 10% gain out of productivity on that. A hospital is open 365 days a year. It doesn't close. A 10% gain on that would be another, 36 days. You'd basically be serving a 400-day calendar on running those extra shifts. So the idea that you're going to lose productivity is probably false. There's a fallacy in that. If your people are able to produce more while working less, why would you not allow them to do that? Anyway, but it goes back to like, we need to change this idea of work. My sister right now, she works a 12-hour shift. She's always worked a 12-hour shift. Nurses work a 12-hour shift. There's like these ingrained milestones that she's subjugated to. This might be a way to kind of radically rethink that. Okay, the third one, psychology. You're supposed to laugh. This is a joke. This is a math joke.
Sorry, I had to unmute to laugh.
This is as close as I get to comedy. All right.
It's a good one.
Okay, so I mean, we hear that, right? Oh, I'm going to give 110%. Really? Or are you just, kind of falsifying math here? Okay, so yeah, the joke is funny, the sentence is clever, whatever. But I mean, there's some actual kind of meat to this. And instead of us thinking that we need to go above and beyond all the time, I think there's a change in mindset, and it would be something like this. So we don't need to give 110%. We need to give our best. Our best is good enough. We're good. We're professionals. We're wonderfully excellent people. Our 100% of our attention and focus and presence is good enough. So we want to perform at our highest level. That's of course what we want to do. Otherwise, why are you doing the task? You're wasting your time if you're not doing that. The thing that we get into trouble with, and I specifically, again, I'm reflecting this onto myself, is that I fail to protect that ability to perform at that level. And this goes back to self-care. I often sacrifice sleep in accordance with taking phone calls or taking meetings that are in different time zones. Maybe I don't eat as best as I should because I'm quickly on the run and I just want to throw something into my body. not taking that time to actually protect that space, that has a negativity to it and a negative consequence. I actually think that this psychology piece is probably the hardest thing, right? Because we have a certain exuberance in when we start a new project or start a new job or start a new engagement, that we want to be the best and we want to throw ourselves into it. And we have an attrition that's associated with that. I mean, without a doubt, we can't maintain these high levels of output indefinitely, especially without the self-care piece. So this is actually kind of the slide that I'm focused on for 2021, is what can I do to actually protect my own ability to perform, and whatever that means. Maybe that performance is in career, maybe it's in my relationships with, whomever I'm with, partners or whomever, maybe it's with my family or parents or somebody like that. What can I do to protect that? Because those things are important to me, but this protection is something that I've sacrificed for a lot of my life. I spent most of the last 12 years on airplanes and airports and hotels. That's the opposite of self-care. That's completely the opposite of that. So psychology, a couple tools here. 80% rule. Leave some gas in the tank. This is the classic work-life balance. I think actually sports are a great trainer for this. I was a wrestler when I was in high school. I was not a good wrestler, full disclosure. Please don't look up my record. It's rather embarrassing. But anyway, you start a wrestling match, you can't go all out in the first 15 seconds because then the next 3 minutes you're on your back, the entirety of it. So you have to learn how to kind of like condition yourself to make it through whatever that timeline is. I think sports is good for that. And then the second thing, the way that we solve problems. So I do 3 crossword puzzles every day. I do the Guardian, the New York Times, and then I do this thing in the local newspaper, which is kind of a joke. I do those every day, and I've done it forever. And one of the things that I've found in doing puzzles is that you've got this focused activity that's right in front of you that you're trying to solve, and you're trying to put together these pieces. And one of the best ways to solve a crossword puzzle is if you don't know the answer to the question, or you don't know what the word is supposed to be, you set it down and you think about it for a few hours or a day, or you come back to it. I've got unsolved crosswords literally all over my house that are somehow in the back of my brain. And then all of a sudden a question will come up and, oh, this is what it was supposed to be. And I'll go fill it out and I'll finish the puzzle. So there's 2 ways in which we solve problems. One of them is a focused approach, and the other one is a diffused approach. The focused approach is what we do when we have tasks in which we're comfortable in solving, and we have some sort of formulaic method for us to be able to do it. So for example, if you're an accountant, you know exactly how to balance the books. If you're doing a math problem, you know exactly how to focus on that specific problem and do it and complete it and finish it. What's difficult is when we get into these more like existential questions of, where should I be going with my company? What sort of strategy should I employ this next year? You can't really sit down and work through that in a formulaic way. It's going to require inputs from different parts of your brain that are maybe best accessed if you go for a walk, get out of the office, go walk around for 5 minutes, clear your head, come back to it, reread what you were doing. These types of self-care activities help in the problem-solving realm. So allow the mind to wander, come back to it. All of a sudden, you can fill in the crossword that you couldn't get 2 days ago. That's where that comes from. Okay, so last thing, and I'll wrap up with this, personal toolkit. This is something that comes out of my life. It may or may not apply to yours, but some tools. I like to make lists. I'm a list guy. I write everything down to do. I get an incredible amount of satisfaction from scratching that off. That's a great moment for me, is when I get to scratch that off, that I don't have that to do anymore. I do it with grocery, because as a single bachelor guy, I'm totally lost in a grocery store. So if I don't write down what I need, I leave with a 12 pack of La Croix and like a block of cheese, and get home, and I got to immediately go back. So anyway, so grocery, I put this list of sleeping. One of the things that really helps me is my brain tends to start churning at 2 a.m. I have no idea why, but that's about the normal time that it starts ramping up. And I'm able, this was a technique given to me by somebody, but if I start thinking about things that I need to do during the day, I'm able to put them onto a list that I keep next to my bed. And as soon as it's on that list, I'm able to purge it from my brain to understand that, yes, it's going to get done. Now it's on the list. I don't have to think about it anymore. That's been hugely valuable to me in my sleeping. And I don't know. I mean, as much beauty sleep as you can get, I'm not getting any younger. So next one, make boundaries. I think about this with my office space. There's many days now where there's a line of pajamas that go from my bed to my shower, and there's a line of towels that come out, and it goes right into where my office space is. And that's not a healthy transition. The idea that like our worlds are merging in ways that we didn't necessarily anticipate them to do, I think is problematic. So I'm talking about physical boundaries here, where you have like a dedicated space to do something, but emotional, of course, is equally as important. How are you separating out the different emotions and the different relationships that you have? Make boundaries. That's something that I want to work on in the year ahead. Say no. Difficult, really difficult for me. I'm a pleaser. I'm absolutely a pleaser. Ask me to do something, I'm going to do it. I'm trying to figure out how to say no to things so that I can protect my time. Again, that idea of like protecting yourself. I'm working on that. That's something that's hard for me. Something that's very hard for me. And the last thing, understand how you deliver value. And I think this goes to anybody that's working in a larger company or in a context in which you have people that answer to you, is what is it that's unique about you that's valuable? One thing that I think about all the time that is not valuable is my inbox, my emails. That's not necessarily where I'm going to deliver value to the world. I'm much better in person. So if we're doing things that are, text based, or we need to type up a lot of narrative, like that's probably not my best use of value. So I think it's important for us to understand how we as people are important, and what it is that, especially in our professional lives, that people are actually paying us for. What is it that's unique about us? And how can we maximize that and minimize this other stuff? And that goes back to that 80% rule from just how to kind of separate your day out. So anyway, that's all I had. This isn't meant to be a lecture. This is more a check-in for me to actually put this together personally, because I struggle with all of these things. And I think I've struggled more with it during the last year than I have at any point in my life. And I think that's a reflection on what the impact of COVID has actually been. So, yeah.
Jeff, I appreciate you pulling this together, regardless of, how insignificant you're making it sound. It really, the one place that really hit home for me was, of course, the place where, the time at work versus the time that you need to spend for your other life. And so thank you for bringing that up personally. What I'm going to move to now is just for everybody to kind of give a second to introduce yourselves. And then if you do have a question for Jeff, that would be a great opportunity to do that. So My name is Ken Raymond. I'm a operations manufacturing engineer. I do things like robotics and vision systems and a lot of stuff that's boring for a lot of people, but it's very exciting for me. I love it. I don't actually have a question for you, Jeff, but I did want to say thank you for reminding me about the split from work. And that's what this year has actually done for me in a positive way. So Dana, we'll move on to you if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and then if you have a question for Jeff. Oh, we're not hearing
I
you.
hear you.
Sorry, I help us like